Hello! Today we are going to discuss an important topic in Flutter, working with nullable data types. We covered what they are in one of the previous lessons, and today we'll talk about how to work with them and what pitfalls you might encounter. To start with, let's recall that a nullable variable is one that can either have a value or be null. Now, let's take a look at how to work with nullable variables in practice. Suppose we have a function that can return either an integer or null. To write such a function, you need to add a question mark to its type. Here's an example. This function, depending on its parameter, returns either null or a regular number. Now, what if we want to use this function? Let's create a variable of type int and assign it the result of our function by passing false. As you can see, we get a compiler error because we cannot assign a nullable value returned by our function to a regular int, which cannot be null. To fix this, we can also make our variable nullable by adding a question mark. Now, there are no errors. Let's try printing the value of our variable. As we can see, a number is printed since we passed false to the function. Now, let's pass true to the function and rerun the code. This time, we see that the result is null. Now, let's print whether our number is even. Previously, we checked this by checking if the remainder of division by 2 is 0. We did this for practice, but in reality, int has its own methods and getters. Like all objects in Dart, int has the toString method and the hashcode getter. But additionally, int has a getter called isEven, which returns a bool value depending on whether the number is even. Let's try printing the result of this getter to the console. By doing so, we see an error. The reason is that we are trying to access the getter of an object that might be null. This is incorrect from Dart's perspective and causes a compilation error. Instead, we can write a condition. If our variable is null, print a corresponding message. Otherwise, print the result from the getter. As you can see, this time there is no error because Dart understands that due to the if statement, the possibility of the variable being null is eliminated. Let's run the code and check. As you can see, the message null is printed since our value is null. Now, let's change the function's parameter and rerun the code. This time, we see the result from the isEven getter, but we can significantly shorten this using an operator called the nullAware operator. To do this, we put a question mark before the dot when calling a method or accessing a field. This operator automatically checks if the variable is null, and if it is, instead of calling a method, it simply returns null. If the variable is not null, it will call the method or access the field. Let's rerun the code. As we can see, everything works. Now, let's change the function's parameter again. As you can see, we got null because the nullAware operator triggered. There is another operator for working with null, which is the exclamation mark. This operator is used when we are absolutely sure that our nullable variable contains a non-null value. Let's test how it works. Change the function's parameter so that it returns a number instead of null, and use the exclamation mark operator instead of the question mark. Let's run the code and see what we get. As you can see, everything works because our variable stored a non-null value. But what if our variable is actually null? Let's change the parameter and rerun the code. As you can see, this time we got an exception, in other words, an error, indicating that our value is null. We haven't yet covered what exceptions are and how to handle them, but we will do so in the next lesson. To avoid such exceptions, you should use this operator with extreme caution. The last operator for today is the Elvis operator. It is represented by 2 question marks. It allows you to specify a default value that will be used if the variable is null. Let's try using it. First, we can change our variable and make it no longer nullable. As we can see, we get an error again. To fix this, let's use the Elvis operator and specify a default value in case null is returned. Let's say 100. Now, we no longer need to use any additional operators when printing the value to the console. I also suggest printing the value of the variable. Let's run our program. As you can see, everything works and our variable is equal to 100. If we change the parameter of our function and it returns a number instead of null, then our variable will now be equal to the value returned by our function. Let's run the program to confirm this. But we can also use this operator when calling methods or accessing fields if our variable is nullable. But for this, we need to enclose our expression in parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we specify a default value for the nullable variable, and only after that, we call the necessary methods or fields. Here's what it looks like. Dart recognizes everything inside the parentheses as a single value. As you can see, our code works. That's all for today. We have explored how to work with nullable values. Remember that properly handling nullable variables can prevent many errors and make your code more robust. I hope this lesson was helpful and that it helped you better understand how to work with null in Flutter and Dart. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. See you in the next lessons. Don't forget to subscribe and give a like if the video was useful.